I'm about to ride. It's the KLH Show, starring me, KLH. I'm telling you, you better hold on to something. Let's go!
What is going on, Waterbury? It's me, your man KLH, back in your TV screen, here to save the world 30 minutes at a time. What is really good? I know that you folks out there have plenty of viewing choices to make. You made this choice, and I appreciate you for it. You have even more choices if you're looking or watching on YouTube. I appreciate all you folks out there, and as always, please tell somebody to tell somebody about the KLH Show. Yeah. So you know what it is, we get into it, and I am going to get into a subject I've kind of alluded to a couple of times and said I will get into it, and today is the day. I am going to talk about abortion. It is a very serious situation, but I think that the conversation that's being had on the talk shows and whatnot isn't complete enough. It talks about certain things, it doesn't talk about other things, so I am here to fill in the gaps. So you could call me the chief gap filler today. So as far as abortion, there are obviously two sides to this issue. On the one side is pro-choice. Now the folks on the pro-choice side of the equation believe that a woman has the right to choose. The problem I have with this side of the issue is that it tends to only consider the woman. So they believe that a woman has a right to choose whether or not to have an abortion. They believe that a woman has a right to her own choices as far as her health and reproductive health specifically. A woman has a right to carry or not carry a pregnancy through to term. I think for the most part that is agreeable to most folks. The sticky part is the abortion thing. On the other side of the equation are the pro-lifers. They believe that human life is the critical thing and that the fetus is of utmost consideration, and the imbalance on that side of the issue tends to be that pro-lifers typically are concerned only with the fetus. So with both of these sides going at it, rah, 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 there's one person in the equation that gets left out all the time. I don't think I've ever seen a discussion on the issue of abortion that considered one person critically important to the scenario, and that's the man. It's the man. Without the man, there would be no pregnancy for there to be an abortion considered for. The man is a critically important player in this, and he's never discussed, and I'm going to get into it later and give you my 2 cents worth as far as why a man should be considered. So I have some things that I want to read for you folks. I'm going to be doing a lot of reading today, and I'm not pretending that this is going to be an absolutely comprehensive discussion on the subject of abortion, but I'm going to give you some things that I have uncovered and hopefully provoke some conversation for you folks out there. You know what I do. This subject really came up particularly within the last week or so, because on the news, in the last news cycle, there's a guy, Todd Akin, he's a congressman, and he's running to be senator. I forget what state it's for. It's Claire McCaskill, I believe it's Missouri. He's looking to unseat Claire McCaskill as U.S. Senator. He got into some hot water because in his discussion about his Republican stance for right to life, in other words, he's a pro-lifer, as most Republicans are, and the moderator of the interview raised up the issue about rape or incest that always comes up. And he said that, from what I understand, this is regarding rape, from what I understand, that's really rare, speaking of rape and women getting pregnant from rape. And he said if it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to shut that whole thing down. He got into all kinds of trouble thinking that there's a legitimate rape, thinking that he was talking about, well, you know, some rapes are legitimate and some rapes are not legitimate. I think he misspoke on that part. He said he misspoke. The problem is that he let the words come out of his mouth, for one thing. The other thing is that he thinks that the female body can discern whether a pregnancy was desired or not. So that if a woman is raped, that somehow her body knows that you know, this is a hostile situation and we need to shut it down, which is unbelievably stupid. So then you have a lot of Republicans, Mitt Romney as one, distancing himself, saying it was absolutely wrong. All these other Republican leaders are throwing him under a bus. It's wrong, blah, blah, blah. And one of the things that this guy, Todd Akin, is an advocate for is a law to determine personhood. And he says that personhood should be determined at the moment of conception. And so Paul Ryan, who is the vice presidential candidate on the Republican side, has co-sponsored or has co-signed this legislation from Todd Akin, agreeing that personhood should begin at conception. And there's a whole lot of reasons why that gets really sticky. And so the whole abortion thing has come up again. I've mentioned abortion a couple of times on the show and said I would get into it. So I'm getting into it. I just wanted to throw out some information I found, and I'll tell you where I stand on it. I got this from a CNN website under the topic of when does human life begin? And again, this considers a Mississippi initiative to define a fertilized human egg as a person with full human rights. Now, what's really behind this is to make abortion illegal. It's kind of trying to find a back door to making abortion illegal, because as you know, the Roe versus Wade case that was brought to the Supreme Court has made abortion legal in all 50 states of this country. And so this personhood thing is a way to backdoor that and make abortion effectively illegal. So this initiative was brought in Mississippi, and Dr. Joseph DeCook, Executive Director of the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians, keep in mind he's pro-life, but he says that an embryo is a living human being at the moment of fertilization. When two sets of chromosomes come together, you have a complete individual. It's the same as you and I, except it's less developed. Also, he considers that because this fertilized egg is a human being, it's simply in the process of development that it deserves the full protection of the law. So that's one thing where they consider, the pro-lifers believe that human life begins at conception. This is very important in determining whether abortion is right or wrong. And that's kind of what I want to get into. Well, entirely what I want to get into. Some other information. It considers the pro-life spectrum and the pro-choice spectrum on this issue. On the pro-life spectrum, I'm probably going to be struggling a little bit with reading this stuff, so bear with me. The government has an obligation to preserve all human life regardless of intent, viability, or quality of life concerns. Pro-life folks believe that abortion, euthanasia, including assisted suicide, the death penalty, and war for the most part, are wrong. In cases where pro-life ethic conflicts with personal autonomy, as in the case of abortion and assisted suicide, it is conservative. In cases where pro-life ethics conflict with government policy, as in the case of the death penalty and war, it is liberal. Now, on the pro-choice spectrum, these folks believe that individuals have an unlimited autonomy with respect to their own reproductive systems as long as they do not breach the autonomy of others. So, the pro-life position confirms or affirms that the following must remain legal. Celibacy and abstinence, obviously. Contraception use should remain legal. Emergency contraception should be legal, and abortion for the first 2 trimesters of pregnancy should remain legal. So this asks the question, what does science tell us? It says that there is no scientific basis for the existence of a soul, which is important because people talk about, well, you know, if embryo has a soul, then obviously you can't kill it. And the problem with this is that it gets into religious beliefs, and the United States government can have no bearing on religious beliefs. It has to remain religiously neutral. And folks believe that, a lot of people believe that we have to have an understanding of the brain to determine when human life begins or when personhood begins, and to examine the brain. And it says it's worth noting that the neocortical development of the brain, which scientists believe makes emotion and cognition possible, does not begin until the late 2nd or early 3rd trimester of pregnancy. Now, 2 other standards of personhood are that some pro-life advocates argue that it is the presence of life alone, or of a unique DNA, that defines personhood. The problem with that is that there are things that contain DNA that obviously don't comprise a person, such as, it uses the example, if you have your tonsils out, your tonsils will have your DNA in it, but everybody knows that your tonsils are not a person and don't merit the privileges and rights of a person. The problem with that argument is that obviously tonsils aren't a person. The tonsils are a part of a person, as opposed to an embryo, which outside of the nutrients that it needs to maintain itself, which human beings, you and I, require nutrients to maintain ourselves. An embryo is a complete package as opposed to tonsils. There goes that. I also want to get into some more talk about what or when life begins. I came across a website that goes into a scientific textbook called The Basics of Biology. And for there to be life, this book suggests that there has to be 5 criteria met. And those 5 criteria are: living things are highly organized. All living things have an ability to acquire materials and energy. And all living things have an ability to respond to their environment. All living things have an ability to reproduce. And all living things have an ability to adapt. So according to this elementary definition of life, it is clear that life begins the moment the sperm fertilizes the egg. And obviously, if it happens inside a human being, then this fertilized embryo, this fertilized egg, is human. So it's the beginning of human life. Some additional information. At the average time when a woman becomes aware that she is pregnant, which is usually the 5th or 6th week after conception, the preborn human being living inside her is metabolizing nutrition, is excreting waste, is moving around, sucking his or her thumb, and doing many other things that living things cannot and do not do. As early as 21 days after conception, the baby's heart begins to beat on his or her own and has its own unique blood type, which is often unique, as in different from the mother's. It also talks about an argument of or a situation where there's a car accident and the person is considered for an organ donation. It is illegal for doctors to look at a person in a car accident who's unconscious and pull the plugs, the life support from this person in order to harvest the organs. If a person is not brain dead and cannot breathe and heart does not pump, only then can they be considered dead. So as long as there is brain activity, beating heart, and or breathing, then the person is considered live. So according to that, abortion is killing a live human. You with me? And history is full of, eyes are bothering me like they always do on the show. Bear with me. History is full of infamous examples of the government trying to decide what is a person, what isn't. Excuse me. In the 1940s, the Germans tried to declare Jews as being non-human, and thus they were able to rationalize their murderous rampage on the Jewish people back then. Here in our country, the government had decided and written into law that African slaves were not human, they were property. The Supreme Court in 1857 ruled that Dred Scott, a black slave, was not a person with rights, but he was the property of his master. And so this concludes the argument by saying the Supreme Court in 1973, when they affirmed Roe versus Wade making abortion legal, was just as wrong, because it was deciding that a fertilized human embryo was not a person. Seems to me it makes some sense. The right to live cannot be legitimately usurped by men. It goes on. No man, no government has the right to deprive one of life, liberty, without a trial by jury, regardless of skin color, age, etc., or its dependence upon others for survival, or its place of residence. Additionally, laying out my case here, throw that one out. This is from the Mayo Clinic, world famous medical clinic, hospital. Talks about fetal development. First trimester. By the 3rd week after fertilization, there's 23 chromosomes from the female, 23 from the male. The combination of these determines the baby's, the fetus's sex, determines hair color, eye color, things like this, and to some extent personality and intelligence. By week 5, which is actually the 3rd week after conception, there's some complicated stuff that a woman is pregnant 2 weeks before conception and technical stuff, but by the 3rd week after conception, it marks the beginning of the embryonic period. This is when the baby's brain, spinal cord, heart and other organs begin to form. By the 4th week after conception, the neural tube along the baby's back is closing and the baby's heart is pumping blood. By the 7th week after conception, the head develops and you start to see nostrils. The 8th week, fingers start to form and eyes are visible. 9th week, toes form. 10th week, the necks develop, eyelids form to protect the eyes. By 11, genitals develop. The bottom line, folks, is this. It is clear from simple scientific evidence that there is a human being developing. Even though there is controversy about when life actually begins, there's no credible argument that it begins anytime after fertilization. All the preponderance of the evidence points to life beginning at conception. The reason this is so important is if life is present, then to end that life forcefully or any other way to end a life is wrong. This is at the heart of the rightness or wrongness of abortion. Okay, I got a little more comfortable here on the couch. You know what it is. It's me and you kicking it around, you know, in the living room. With all that said, I believe that abortion is wrong. I believe it's wrong because abortion ends a human life. And a lot of pro-choice people will say, oh, you're not a woman and you can't decide, and what about incest and rape? Which is a phony argument. Excuse me. I've always known it was a phony argument. Just common sense tells you that pregnancies from incest and rape are going to be a small fraction of the pregnancy. So I did a little research. My research confirmed what I already knew, that it is a very small percentage. Only about 1% of pregnancies comes from rape, and only around the 0.5% of pregnancies comes from incest. With that, I am not trivializing the tragedy of those situations. I'm simply saying that if your argument for the lawfulness of abortion is that you have to consider women who have been raped or been victims of or partaken in incest, because it doesn't just mean they're victims. Maybe they victimized a young boy and got pregnant. But there's such a small fraction of the issue that that's not really why they're into it. Why they really want abortion legal so that a woman can choose. And that's what they really ought to say. It's just a false argument. So additionally, pro-choicers say that it's a woman's right, and they go on and on and on, and that women should be able to choose and this and that. And I say that women do have a right to choose. They have a right to choose whether or not they get pregnant. How about that? Women have a right to choose whether or not they use birth control. They have a right to choose whether or not they use birth control effectively. They have a right to choose a stable job, a stable living situation, a stable relationship. How about that? Why don't women's rights advocates advocate women making those kinds of choices? If you are pro-choice, why not advocate women making smart choices? If women were responsible, and I'm not saying all women aren't responsible, but when women are responsible, they make responsible choices. They make choices based on good sense. And when they do that, abortions will be almost never even a consideration. Abortions usually come about because a woman made a stupid choice. Let's be honest about it. Women don't have to have abortions. Women who are educated and have good careers very rarely get pregnant unless they want to get pregnant, because they think about it before they get in bed with a man and have unprotected sex. They make choices. Pro-choice. Why don't pro-choice people advocate good choices? Another thing, what about celibacy? Women don't have to have sex. To listen to pro-choice people, it's as if they think that women have to be able to have sex or they'll die. You don't have to have sex. You can make choices. So I think it's important to consider the whole spectrum of what's going on here. Now I wanted to get in real quickly the thing about men. Women, people who are advocates of pro-choice, believe that a woman can unilaterally decide whether or not to have an abortion, which takes out of the equation the man. Now, if a woman does decide to carry a pregnancy through to term, now these pro-choice people are looking at the man who had no voice in any of this to support the woman, which to me is unfair. Why should the man have to jump in now? You made your choice, live with your choice. Now, to be clear, I think that men should support their children. But I think it should come about in a much more logical, well thought out way. When people make a choice, a conscious choice, a conscious decision to have a child under a good situation. But regardless of if it was a smart choice or not, I do think that men should support their children. So don't get me wrong. I'm simply making an argument about the unfairness of the pro-choice thing, pro-choice position, and stating that it's only a woman's choice. What I really think should happen is that women, that the written consent of men should be required on all abortions. I think that the possibility of abortion being outlawed is unlikely in the foreseeable future. That being the case, if a woman wants to get an abortion, I think it's fair that the man be considered. I think it's wrong for in the discussion about the birth of a child that a man is thrown in the garbage and that he means nothing. I think it's wrong. And I think abortion is wrong. I know there's going to be a lot of people get mad at me and whatnot, but it's holler at me. We're at the end of the show, man. Get at me. You know what it is. KLHOUD1 at Comcast.net. I would love to get some feedback from you folks. Usually I can speak pretty good. Stumbling around a little bit today. So yeah, get at me. Hit me with your comments, questions, concerns, whatever. As always, you don't have to agree with me. Just be respectful of the situation, and I'd love to read your comments on the air if I can get some. So you know what it is at the end of every show. We gotta get our drinky drink on. Yeah. I'm gonna keep it real basic, man. Bud Light. I'm gonna pop this bad boy up just for the show. You know, may I live to be 100 years, and may you live to be 100 years in a day. What's better than that? Peace.